Welcome to Grappling with a Gray, a forum promoting an ethical thinking and ethical mindset to better see both sides of complex issues and navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I am Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and with me today is Christopher Bauer, who is a speaker, author, and consultant on ethics, compliance, and accountability. Kimberly Davis is an author, TEDx speaker, and founder of Brave Leadership University, leading development programs worldwide around authentic leadership, purpose, presence, and influence. And Catherine Fitzgerald is a writer, speaker, certified coach, and founder of Brass Tacks with Heart Executive Coaching. She helps founders, owners, and C-suite executives and their teams to build businesses that fuel their lives, not consume them. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having
Glad
us.
to be here again.
And here is today's ethics challenge. A close friend shares with you her hurt and outrage when the subject of the Holocaust came up in a social studies class. A teacher told your friend's teenage son that he should go back to Auschwitz. The boy, who had previously been proud and open about his Jewish identity, has now abandoned all outward signs of being Jewish. Your friend reported the incident to both the principal and to the school board, but there is no indication that any action was taken against the teacher. Although you are not Jewish yourself, or perhaps because you're not Jewish, you feel duty-bound to speak out. You write an op-ed in the local paper outlining these events. You don't mention any names, but you do mention the school district. Instead of being grateful for your support, your friend is furious with you. There are very few Jews in the school district, and her son is now terrified of being singled out and possibly targeted by other students. Your friend says that you had no right to publish the article and that you have compromised her son's safety and well-being. Were you wrong to publish the article? And in general, how do we evaluate situations where upholding our principles may cause collateral damage to others, especially children? Is it wrong to speak? If it's wrong to speak up and wrong to stay silent, what other options do we have? The floor is open.
Well, my first reaction was this really drives home how unfair it is that we don't get to know the outcome of our actions before we take them, right? But sadly, or I guess maybe not, but in my mind, sadly, we don't have that option. So the best we can do is to try and focus on what could be unintended consequences and try and make a sound judgment based on that. We may still not know what the right answer is, but that at least is something that I think has to inform our decision.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say, I agree with you, Christopher. It'd be great to have a crystal ball and know what the outcome of our choices
But no.
but on the flip side, I kind of felt like two things popped out at me when I read this. Number one, as a friend, I think I would have asked why the mother didn't immediately go and talk to the teacher directly, rather than going around her to the administration or him, who I didn't catch the gender of the teacher, but I think that would have been, I would have taken my son along and used it as an opportunity to, which is my second point, that this is an incredible opportunity to see the intersection of emotional intelligence and empathy.
Yes,
and rather than being completely consumed with that mama bear, protectivity that I have well experienced, I would have said, okay, this is our opportunity to have a conversation that is out in the open with this teacher. Because by going straight to the administration and not directly to the teacher, you have not gotten the full context of their intention. And I think that having the full story is always better than not. So as a friend, my role, I think, would have been in that conversation to kind of, ask that question. Then, the fallout of the article is also my opportunity to have been empathetic and emotionally intelligent enough to have the conversation with the mom about how it made me feel, and I'm not Jewish,
Right.
and then I wanted, have a conversation. I don't know that my instinct would have been to write something really public without having a conversation first. And we don't know that. I'm just kind of filling that blank in.
Sure. I have a yes, but question for you. So I absolutely agree about going to the teacher. I think that is a missed opportunity at all sorts of levels. But you mentioned taking the son. When the son says, "Mom, please don't do that. I already feel like I'm being picked on. This is just going to make a bad situation worse. This teacher already has it out for me. She already has these anti-Semitic ideas wherever they come from. Please don't make this worse by having a conversation with her." Does that make it easier or
Well,
tougher?
as a mom, I've actually been in that situation, but not, obviously the context of the situation, the problem was different. It was my son, and it was a swim coach, and he begged me not to get involved. But, the swim coach was really shaming him in front of other swimmers, and he was terrified of him because of it. And my son was in high school. This was not, an elementary school thing. And it was a young coach, and I saw an opportunity to have a conversation, and I did it. And I said, and if it ever gets to my son that you and I had this conversation, I will not let this go. It will go straight to the administration. But I came to you out of respect for you and your role as his coach, and maybe the understanding that you don't have the full picture of the amount of weight your words carry. And so at the end of the day, we ended up being, he respected me for having come to him, and it never got back to my son. And things did change in terms of the way he approached people.
That is remarkable, Catherine.
You should get parenting classes, Catherine.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is why you're such a good coach, because you're able to stay clear-headed in situations like this. I think this is a perfect, this situation is the perfect example of how heightened emotions are right now for all of us, and how reactive we tend to be in the face of those heightened emotions, and how even with the best of intentions, our reactivity can lead us down paths that aren't necessarily going to lead us where we want to be. And to your point, Christopher, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had a crystal ball? That would be that would be absolutely fantastic. What I appreciate so much about what you shared, Catherine, is that having the opportunity to talk to the teacher was a teaching opportunity, to teach the teacher opportunity that was sadly missed. But also, we don't know all the facts. I think about my son, who is 18, and his passion for shows like South Park, where everything is so irreverent, and it's all for the shock value, and there is nothing that is off limits. And don't judge me as a parent now. I just say, oh, why are you letting your son watch South Park?
Oh, I'm laughing because
how many of you have an opportunity to actually allow your teenage children what they watch, what they don't watch these days? Anyway, some of the things that come out of his mouth are absolutely horrifying to me. I absolutely trust his moral compass, but I think a lot of what goes for humor today is not funny, and it crosses over to a place that is dangerous. And I can imagine, and I don't know the situation, I don't know this teacher. This teacher may be a horrible human being who is terribly bigoted and just really just despicable. I don't know. We don't know the facts of this, and that's, we rush to judgment without knowing facts, and that always gets into trouble. But I can imagine a teacher who teaches teenagers crawling into the gutter with them on occasion to be cool. and how inappropriate that is. Yes. And how, what a wasted opportunity that parent couldn't say, hey, do you realize what you did here? Because I suspect that there was no clue going on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah,
it's,
that's
yeah.
a-
And I could be wrong. I mean, it's and what's happening in Florida, is indicative of how wrong I very well could be. And history has proven that my idealism is misfounded. But I also think we don't know the facts, and when we jump to conclusions and we react and take action without knowing the facts and stopping and having conversations, that it leads us down really dangerous paths.
Yeah, there's
I-
been a
I
very
had-
interesting thread for me because I taught high school for 23 years. And I had plenty of episodes where parents went straight to the principal or the head of the school board. Usually something about a grade or homework, which of course, how does the head of the school board have any any connection to what's going on in the classroom? But interestingly, I didn't even think about going to the teacher first when I heard this scenario, because this is just something that seems so beyond the pale. But you're absolutely right. The first stop always is go to the person involved. Find out, what did they actually say? Now, it could be the mother in this scenario did that. I can't say for sure she didn't, but
Right.
that's always the first stop. And if you
Yep.
can't find a response there, then you start going up the ladder.
Right. Whether it's school or in an organization. Right?
Anywhere, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And see, I found myself kind of ruminating about a detail of this, which was the fact in the scenario, sort of the implied question that the mother had mentioned the district, and that the person writing the article had
Letter
mentioned the
writing,
district. Yeah. And the mother was maybe concerned that specificity somehow was a part of the problem. At least that's what I drew, rightly or wrongly, from the way the scenario was worded. And I found myself running in circles with that a little bit, but ultimately landing on the fact that I would have been concerned if the letter had not mentioned the district, because all too often the more vague a concern or complaint is, the more it's fodder for rumor and innuendo, and it feels like things have much more power to spiral out of control in a negative way if we don't, just like going to the teacher first as a way to get specificity, what actually did happen, who's involved in this, what are the implications. I think if you don't mention the district, it gets to be kind of a general concern or complaint that doesn't have nearly the potential value for getting people's attention, for calling for change, than if you are more specific.
Yeah.
So let's come back to our main topic, which, Edmund Burke famously said that all that's necessary for evil to flourish is for good people to do nothing.
Yep.
And, one of my real heroes is Martin Niemöller, the pastor in Germany who spoke out against the Nazis and got thrown into Dachau for his efforts. Did he really think he was going to change anything? And nevertheless, he felt he could not stay silent, but he was putting himself in harm's way, as opposed to putting someone else in harm's way, and that other person being a child. How do we approach this dilemma where there doesn't seem to be a good solution? I can't stay silent because then I'm tacitly acknowledging what's going on or approving what's going on, and I can't speak up because then there's collateral damage.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the challenges that is true about human nature is so we can't stay silent, and we cannot tolerate bigotry and hatred. We cannot. However, at the same time, and I shouldn't say however, I should say and at the same time, natural human reaction when you say you are bad and wrong and is to just go talk to the hand. They're not going to listen. Nothing can be changed by saying you're a horrible human being and you should be ashamed of yourself. No one goes, oh yes, you're right, I'm a horrible human being, now I see the light.
Thank you for sharing.
If we truly want to change things, right?
Yeah.
We have to find a way to be heard, and just name calling and making it. I mean, like sometimes for example, I went to one of the women's rally in Austin a number of years ago. And the vitriol in the signage was, I mean, it was like, oh, and nobody's gonna go, yeah, you're right. We suck. We're completely wrong. And I mean, I guess I want to find a way to have conversation. Like, I think this is why what you do is so valuable, Jonathan. So we're not just I'm right, you're wrong, and staying stuck in our camps,
Polarized.
calling each other names and otherizing each other. We've got to find the humanity in, wow, I really blew that. How do you help someone own their mistakes without publicly shaming them and helping them
Exactly.
see a new way? And I think your strategy, Catherine, would have been a beautiful strategy to
Well,
do
it's
that
interesting.
in retrospect, right?
Yeah, I think I'm listening to you, and your comment about us jumping into our own reactivity on both sides of this equation seems to be pretty typical of our society today.
It
More and more so.
absolutely is, and it's fueled. It's intentional. I mean, like a lot of people make a lot of money by fueling this vitriol.
Stoking the fire on both
sides.
sides. Yes. And so for me, it comes to that point of we are recognizing, becoming aware that we are all making up stories about the stuff we don't understand or know to be fact. Because, you hear this outrageous statement came from a teacher. We all, immediately put the poison to the pen in terms of telling ourselves why they did that or what a horrible person they are or whatever. And I think it is the emotional intelligence challenge that says, okay, let's stand up and realize that, a teacher decided to do this to better the lives of young people. So there may be more to this story than we understand. And also in the same point, in that you hear the story and you're not a player in the immediate circle of this, and you're making up stories about both sides of the equation, and you decide to take a stand when you don't have all the facts. And so writing this letter very publicly and publishing it, to me, is just another version of the same thing, which is reacting and acting based on partial information and filling in the blanks where we don't know what it really is, and escalating even beyond the teacher and the student and the situation without having a good exploratory conversation about what happened, to me, is, compounding a situation that's already pretty bad.
Well, so hypothetically, the mother has the conversation with the teacher, and the teacher says, yeah, I said that, that's what I meant. Is that a
that changes the facts, right? That changes
that alters. Yes.
Is that article then justified or justifiable?
If that was part of the original story, I think the escalation on both sides is justified, because that is not what this country was founded on. And I believe that our public institutions that are sustained by taxpayer money do not have the privilege to bend the rules. And the rules are that we are all created equal, and we all are given a right to practice whatever faith we choose, because we are free.
Of course, then you have
private school.
Actually, I've been involved in that because my kids went to Catholic school, and they do march by their own rules as a nonprofit, which is, a religious institution. Now, obviously, the goal is to be Christian or to be loving to one another, to respect each other's humanity. But the other phrase that came to me in this whole thing is man's inhumanity to man. We see it all over our world. When was the last time you looked at someone that didn't look like you and made a judgment? It happens automatically in our world. And when you see the eyes of another human being and can let go of all the judgment and realize that that's a beating heart, that's a soul, another human, we have to have compassion for each other's humanity. We have to have compassion for our humanity in terms of how broken we are, how maybe that came out of their mouth without any malicious intent. It was just, they're not Jewish. It's not part of their framework. Maybe they don't know really the details about Auschwitz. I don't know. But given them the assumed innocence of that statement until you further confirm, I think is the more that would be the way I would lean. I'll just put it that way.
I do notice we've done a spectacular job of avoiding Jonathan's actual question.
Oh, yeah.
I think I addressed it. I said I didn't
what
think it
was that?
a good thing.
I don't even
About how do
remember.
you evaluate when you've got a true dilemma, like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And of course,
Right.
most people, I don't know about in your world, in my world, most of the time when someone tells me they have an ethical dilemma, they have no such thing. They just have a decision that they hate to have to make. But this is one of those real life dilemmas, right? There's a cost left, cost right, cost if you go up the middle.
Right.
And how do you
Right.
make that decision, and doubly so when there is some reasonable expectation of collateral damage? And I would love to have a snappy answer.
There is no snappy
And
answer.
I don't.
Yeah, sometimes that is the answer, is that there's no good answer, and we just have to grapple with it.
Yeah.
And the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was chief rabbi of Great Britain. Has some really powerful remarks about anti-Semitism, and he says that it can't be addressed by Jews alone because it doesn't come from Jews.
Yeah.
And therefore we can't solve the problem. On the other hand, what I've observed is that there are Jews who see anti-Semitism everywhere. It's much the same of the culture of, anything, microaggressions and cultural appropriation, all the other things that we can be accused of doing, even if our comments are benign or ambiguous, or someone just got their feelings hurt because they didn't like something. And the reaction, there was a case here in Missouri a couple of years ago. A teacher gave a homework assignment. They were studying the antebellum South. And she gave an assignment asking the students to imagine that they were plantation owners.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
And talked about, buying and selling slaves. Now, reading the assignment, it was a little clumsy, but there wasn't any indication that there was any malicious intent. The teacher was probably trying to provoke a thought experiment. I think the kids might have been a little bit young for it, but my wife had actually taught in that district, and she said every time she walked in the door, she felt like she'd gone to Scandinavia. Everybody, teachers and students alike, were platinum blonde, and probably none of them had any experience interacting with people from other races. And I think the teacher was just oblivious. And yet the reaction was so overwhelming. And when I juxtapose that against a story like the one we're talking about, where something that's so profoundly offensive was said, presumably, it does really speak to the inconsistency and the confusion that I think has become more and more prevalent in our society.
Well,
Yeah.
I think we just have to continue to fight to stop otherizing each other. And that, to me, that is the problem, because we're going to, if we're assuming this teacher is demonizing people who are Jewish, which I pray to God that was not truly the case, but if we're making assumptions, then what's going to happen is we're going to demonize that person. She's demonizing, she or he, the teacher is demonizing. We're all just demonizing. And as soon as you can take someone's humanity away from them, that's what makes things like the Holocaust possible. Once you can recognize we're all human beings, you can't do what was done to the Jewish people if you saw that you were doing this to human beings that were just like you. I don't at my core believe that. And I think the way that that is possible is by making otherizing normal, the norm.
Mhm.
It's maybe a little academic, but it seems to me that a part of what we're kind of covertly talking about here is the difference between a moral issue and an ethical issue, right? That we can take a moral stance on something and say, this is absolutely not okay. But then the
Yes.
ethical question becomes, so it's not okay.
about it?
What's plan A? What's plan B?
Right.
Can we,
Right.
in some reasonable way, try and predict the consequences? Can we try in some reasonable way predict the unintended consequences? And to what extent is that going to dictate
Yes.
how we're going to respond to this line in the sand that we've drawn? And I think that's where it becomes
Yeah.
significantly tougher.
Well, and the challenge is what's happening is there are places that are so uncomfortable with dealing with these conversations that they're just not going to talk about them. We're just going to pretend that there's no difference in race. We're not going to talk about race. We're not going to talk about differences in religion. We're just going to pretend it just doesn't exist. And we're going to take out all books that talk about it. And we're going to remove it all because we're so uncomfortable dealing with the uncomfortable. And I think that's where the value in conversations like this lives, because if we can get used to having rich conversations that allow us to get more comfortable dealing with the discomfort of this, then maybe there's hope. But pretending it doesn't exist or otherizing, I think that's not going to make it better.
Yeah, well, and
So-
to state the obvious, we have a society, and I'm speaking worldwide here, that is more and more bound to those divides, right? We have
Yes.
media that does a great job of driving a wedge between differences between cultures and individuals and races and religions. And then people that selectively, just by human nature, filter out any kind of information that is contrary to what their beliefs are. So we've gone from a people that wrestled with suspicions, where there were, suspicions still being that area where you have potentially the ability to change your way of thinking or feeling about something, to a society of beliefs where you're just filtering out the contrary information, and you're living in a bubble, either because of where you get your information, or you simply don't buy the contrary information that you hear. And that, unfortunately, and this coming from someone who, as Jonathan has heard me say before, I am sort of a pathological optimist, but in spite of that, this feels like something that really at this point in our existence is really feeding itself in kind of a runaway train in a very fast, very negative direction.
I was listening to you both and thinking statesmanship. That is what is missing in our world today. The ability to agree, to disagree, and to debate both sides without taking it personally. So back to our story, though. If I was the person who had written that public article or op-ed, and my friend had gone through this and was mad at me, was angry with me, and very outwardly so, my instinct would be to go to them open-handedly and share my heart and say, the last thing I was trying to do was alienate you or cause a problem for your son. And please forgive me would be my lead, and help me to know the better way to do it in the future. God willing, this doesn't happen in the future. But if it did, how would you recommend that I express my alignment with the fact that was out of bounds? Because I do want to support you, and I don't want to do it in a way that causes more problems. Because I think that, again, if we look at each other and recognize our humanity and our ability to make mistakes without intention, assume good intention, then healing is the only, forgiveness and healing is the only answer here.
I think on so many levels that communication can preempt many of these problems. And that because we are human and we are passionate, we often jump over steps and we don't take the time to communicate first at any level, which is how we get into these situations. And sometimes even doing everything right, we're still going to be stuck in a situation where we really don't know how to make the call.
Yeah.
We can't stay silent. We can't speak up. And what option is left? I think that it's important to add in as we're wrapping up that we're just 2 days after this horrific shooting
Here in Nashville. This was it was about 2/3 of a mile from our house.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh,
Oh, I'm so sorry, Christopher.
And, of course, we're still waiting to hear. Apparently, the shooter had some manifesto that I don't know if it's been released yet. So we don't really know what the motives were. But aside from not excusing this in any way, but since we're seeing so many of these types of things, what is it about our culture that is promoting this type of behavior? And I think starting with communication, investigating, asking people questions, recognizing red flags, being open and honest is always going to be the first step in first trying to prevent people from getting to a point where they are going motivated to do such things, and also to protect ourselves from people who have made up their minds that they are going to do such things.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Catherine, you just modeled this so beautifully today is how do we step back from that reactivity? I have no doubt that the writer of that piece had just the best intentions in the world,
Absolutely.
right? And I think oftentimes we have really great intentions, but our intentions fueled by emotion can no matter how good, can be dangerous. And taking the time to step back and ask ourselves, well, what is it I don't know, and what are the different ways I could deal with this, not just going to our first instinct, because our first instinct is often not going to serve us.
Absolutely.
And maybe just as a final thought, because when I think about this case and reflect on it, you never want to put a child in a situation where the child's going to feel endangered. On the other hand, the culture will go in the direction that we let it. And ultimately, it may come back to endanger that child more or other children more. And that's another very difficult call, causing a certain amount of pain or discomfort in the short term to avoid more pain and discomfort in the long term. And again, if we had your crystal ball, Christopher, we would things would be a lot easier, if not simple.
But both of you would be out of work, so
I would gladly take the change of career.
It's called job security.
There you go. I love it.
Well, thank you. This has been a particularly stimulating conversation. Christopher Bauer, Kimberly Davis, and Catherine Fitzgerald, thank you again for your insights and your thoughtful comments. And for those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic that you would like us to take up, please go to jonasongoldson.com. Use the contact information there. Submit your idea. If it's compelling, we will definitely take it up on a future episode, which we will do next time we convene when the panel comes together to grapple with the gray. Oops. Where's the... Oh, there we go.